everyone. I've heard many horror stories, not only on YouTube but on different websites and so forth, about people who have tried to take K-line products, the original K-line products, not the Lionel, K-line by Lionel, but the original K-line products that are conventional control, and attempting to convert them to operate under TMCC. Well, I'm going to do my attempt at converting this locomotive here, this GG1, to operate under TMCC. At the moment, the engine is just simply conventional control. It only simply has forward, neutral, reverse. The couplers on it are the magnetic button-type couplers, to which requires a control track in order to uncouple the locomotive. Okay, as you can see, I've now removed the shell from the engine, and what you're seeing here is this electronic circuit board is just simply nothing more than an electronic E-unit. It does nothing more than operate the locomotive from forward, neutral, reverse, and back to neutral again, just like the old Lionel E-units used to do. As you can also see, we've got two can-style motors in here that have flywheels on each one. We have connections here for the headlights, which I've obviously unplugged at this point. And we also have down here, we have what they call a lockout switch, which means that what you can do is once you have the locomotive set to operate in one direction, you can change this switch and it will keep the locomotive running only in that direction. Okay, as we move over here to this end of the locomotive, as you can see, we've already got some holes drilled into the frame from the factory to be able to mount our speaker to allow the sound to come through without any problem. So I've got plenty enough room right there that I can mount the speaker. Okay, here we are. These are the components that I'm going to be using to make this conversion. First off, we have the electrocouplers that I have purchased from a local hobby shop that deals in modern toy train parts. So I've got one for each end. They already come with a plug on the end of the wires for it that will plug right into the command board. Next we have the command board itself and all the components that go with it. There's also a complete wiring harness and everything that's in here, all the parts that will be needed, a run program switch, some heat shrink tubing, some zip ties, and some mounting screws, and so on. Then we move over here to the soundboard. This is obviously from Electric Railroad Company. It has the rail sounds to it, so you've got the soundboard that's up here, you've got your speaker down here, and again, you've got all your wiring harnesses, your double-sided foam tape to mount it and so forth, some zip ties in there, a couple of mounting screws, and so on. So this should be everything, all the parts that I would need to be able to convert this locomotive to operate under TMCC command. Okay, here we are again. I have already gotten a little bit started on this project by simply removing both of the pilot trucks on the engine, and I've already removed the standard coupler that comes with it. And one of the things about this coupler is there's a Phillips head screw that's right here. And this screw goes down through the frame and into the coupler head here in order to prevent the coupler from pivoting at all, because there's no center spring on this in any way. Once I had removed the pilot from here and I had undone this Phillips head screw and removed this nut, this entire assembly here, this sub-assembly, I was able to just simply remove it out of the way. Now this Phillips head screw, obviously I'm not going to be able to reuse and put it down through there, because this screw lines up with right where the coil is that's wrapped around the shank of the coupler, and obviously that would destroy the coupler. So I also attempted to use this same shaft that's here to mount the new coupler, but I discovered that the mounting area of the shank here on this coupler is a lot thinner than what's on the replacement coupler, the electro coupler that I'm using. So what had happened was the bottom of this pin ended up touching the center rail, which obviously shorts everything out. So I ended up going to my local hardware store and I purchased a simple 832 round head screw and a nut and put that in place, and I was able to take and just tighten that up enough so that, my coupler no longer pivots. And I ran my wires up through underneath the frame here so that I can now run them up through the frame of the engine and plug it into my command board. After completing the installation of both couplers on both trucks, I've also taken the frame and removed the motors and the drive wheels and so forth down to the bare frame and pre-drilled some holes that will be needed for this project. Here we can see that I've drilled one hole down through the frame here to allow the wiring to come up through for the couplers. I've also purchased at my local hardware store some rubber grommets to help protect the wires from the sharp edges of the hole. Here you can see that I've already got the command board already installed using the hole that I had pre-drilled earlier. I've already made the electrical connections to the board. With the white wires here, I've got my connections for my run program switch. This set of wires in the back over here, these lead to my lights. And then these connections over here at this end of the board lead to my track power and to the motor. Now, as far as the track power is concerned, the center rail and the outside rail connections need to be correct. If they are not correct, you run severe risk of damage to the command board. As far as the wiring for the motors itself, it really doesn't matter which way you hook them up, other than the fact that, say, with this GG1, there really isn't a front or a rear of the engine, but in the case of, say, an F3 unit, there is definitely a front and a rear. So you want to make sure that you've got your front coupler is plugged into the proper socket for the front coupler, and your rear coupler is obviously plugged into the proper connection for the rear coupler. But when you hook up the wires for the motor, like I said, it doesn't really make any difference to a certain extent, other than the fact that the command board, its default when you first power it up, is going to be for the locomotive to run in a forward direction. Now, if you've got these connections made correctly, when you power this thing up and you start to run the engine, it should run forwards. If it does not, if it wants to run in reverse, all you simply need to do to correct this situation is reverse the wiring going to the motor, and that will resolve the issue. Here I've got the soundboard installed using the double-sided foam tape, and using the wiring harness that was provided with the kit, I've made all the connections. Well, we're down here almost close to the very end. The last thing that we need to address is the antenna wire. With this particular engine, the shell is a die-cast metal. Now, if you've got a plastic shell, it's really pretty easy. All you need to do is use some hot glue and glue the antenna wire to the underside of the shell, and you shouldn't have any problems, or at least so I'm told. But being a die-cast shell, what it's going to do is it's going to shield the antenna, which will deter from the engine receiving the signals properly. So what I've done here is I've taken my antenna wire and I'm going to hook it up to the pantographs on this particular engine, because the pantographs are completely insulated from the shell of the engine. Now, another thing that you could do, because by doing what I've done here, is preventing you from ever using this engine using an overhead catenary. But if you wanted to use an overhead catenary, what you could do is using some plastic washers and some nylon screws is insulate the shell itself from the frame of the entire locomotive. That way you could use the shell of the engine as your antenna, but in my case it's much easier and simpler because I don't have a catenary to just simply use the pantographs as my antenna. Alright, at this point I've got all the connections are made, antennas are hooked up, all my wiring is done. It's time to button this thing up and let's give it a test run.
Dispatcher here, please hold for track orders, over. Copy that, out. Dispatcher here, you're cleared onto the main, over. Roger that, all clear, out.
And there you have it, a K-line conventionally controlled locomotive converted to Lionels TMCC. Thanks for watching.